Hello and welcome to this week's edition of 50 Years Serving the Island, a series of programmes showcasing highlights from Manx Radio's archives during the station's first 5 decades serving the public in the Isle of Man. In 1968, Manx Radio was transferred into public ownership and became the island's public service broadcaster. Today, a special Easter edition of the farming programme from 2003 which sees John Kennaugh reflecting on the spirituality of the countryside.
Well, good morning everyone on this Easter morning, this most significant day in the Christian faith when we celebrate the new life of resurrection. And those of us who farm in the countryside and who live in the various hamlets of the Isle of Man have a very, very wonderful privilege in that we see firsthand new life in the birth of lambs in the lambing shed. Spring calving suckler herds will have calved by now. We see fields of barley, oats and wheat sprouting and new life emerging from the earth. All in all, a very, very wonderful season. And on this Easter morning, we thought we would bring you something of the spirituality of the countryside, the things we see there that confirm our faith. I'm joined on this programme by 2 good friends, Carol Little from Glenmay, who has been on with me before on this programme and who has a wide repertoire now of poems written by both local poets and by those who are nationally and historically known. Joining me as well is David Jackson from Agnish. David as well has brought to the Manx audiences up and down the island the poems of Willie Tea particularly. Many of the people in the north of the island listening to this will remember Willie Tea at Sandygate in Derby. So here we are then with some of the poetry that we'll be sharing with you to bring you some of the spirituality of the countryside. David, I wonder would you begin for us with one of Willie Tea's, or maybe several of Willie Tea's. Some of them are quite short. Bring us some of Willie Tea's observations as he lived on the north of the island at Derby.
The first one, John, is titled April, and it is, as you say, about new life, and I'll read it now for you. 'Twas Sabbath morn in April time, I wandered o'er the mead. I watched the merry lambs at play and saw their parents feed. A sweet content hung o'er the vale, on bird and beast and flower. I gazed with soul-inspiring joy and blessed the passing hour. The rising lark sang shrill and clear against the azured sky. The opening primrose hailed again the stream that rippled by. Embalmed in dew the bursting buds, the stately plum adorn. All kindly sunbeams fondly kissed each tender blade of corn. Beneath the shady willow bower the moorhen built her nest. Within the coppice by the grove the night owl flew to rest. The plaintive curlew circling cried high o'er the marshy fen. The whirring partridge rudely brake the silence of the glen. With steady peal the Sabbath bell came stealing through the trees, borne o'er the distant pathless moor by the soft refreshing breeze. Sweet redbreast at the cottage door poured forth her cheerful lays, as if to hail the dawn of spring and bless this day of days. While nature's pleasing features smile over every hill and cove, if this mortal span belongs, what of the realms above, where Sharon's rose in splendour blooms and doth his fragrance pour, where streams of fullest rapture flow on yonder happier shore? I think that expresses what you've been trying to say, John.
It really does, David, and it does show that it's all there to be observed if you have the eyes to see it. And Willie Tea, as he went about his daily work and his daily life, obviously had the eyes to see exactly that. That's a lovely poem, David. Thank you for bringing that to us, and I know you've got some more for us later on. Carol, earlier on in this series, I remember you after a ploughing match programme that we did from Cronkovody, reciting for me the Song of the Plough. A lot of ploughing will be completed by now, but it does set in context the farmer's role in society. Maybe you'll share that one with us again.
Yes, I'd love to. And I wish I knew who actually had written this, John. I'm afraid I don't know, so maybe one of our listeners might be able to tell us. Turn down the green, O man who ploughs, guide thou the plough with sharpened share. Turn up the brown to sapphire skies. Mankind on thee for bread relies. Bright shines the sun, and God looks down on man, on beast, on hill and town. Then sow the seed in mellowed earth, do harrows sway, and wild birds mirth. The joyful hum of threshing time, and later drone as mills make flour. Mankind gets bread. But what man thinks it was your sweat that forged the links? But sure, the world must bend its will in every age to ploughman's skill. Then, oh hurrah, all men who toil, you're masters of the sullen soil. Turn up the brown, O man who ploughs the wakened earth to warming sun, and give all men their daily bread. Your work is God's, for he has said he'll bless your work, your plough team too. Reward is sure for what you do. Then, oh hurrah, sons of the soil, God speed the plough. God bless your toil.
Carol, I wish too I knew who wrote that piece of poetry, because it really does set in context the role of the farmer, and it gives us some encouragement, I think, to see that that role is still as important as ever. I'd like to bring you a piece now that I've shared with you before, perhaps several times. It's from a book that I obtained some time ago called Country People, an Endangered Species. It's written by Tony Hodgson. It's not actually written by him, it's compiled by him, because he has brought together many quotations from different books, different stories, and different sources. Here's one now from Amaryllis at the Fair. Under the wall was a large patch recently dug. Beside the patch, a grass path, and on the path, a wheelbarrow. A man was busy putting in potatoes. He wore the raggedest coat ever seen on a respectable back. As the wind lifted the tails, it was apparent that the lining was loose, and only hung by threads. The ruffs were worn through. There was a hole beneath each arm, and on each shoulder the nap of the cloth was gone. The colour, which had once been grey, was now a mixture of several soils and numerous kinds of grit. The hat he had on was no better. It might have been made of some hard pasteboard, it was so bare. Every now and then the wind brought a few handfuls of dust over the wall from the road, and dropped it on his stooping back. The way in which he was planting potatoes was wonderful. Every potato was placed at exactly the right distance apart, and a hole made for it in a general trench. Before it was set, it was looked at and turned over, and the thumb rubbed against it to be sure that it was sound. And when finally put in, a little mound was delicately adjusted round it to keep it in its right position till the whole row was buried. He carried the potatoes in his coat pocket, those, that is, for the row, and he took them out one by one. Had he been planting his own children, he could not have been more careful. The science, the skill, and the experience brought to this potato planting you would hardly credit. For all this care was founded upon observation, and arose from very large abilities on the part of the planter, though directed to so humble a purpose at that moment. What a super picture of a character that conjures up, and how real and how simple the faith of many in the countryside, and very, very accurately captured there by Richard Jefferies in that quotation excerpt from Amaryllis at the Fair. David, have you got some more of Willie Tea's that you could share with us?
Yes, John, I have a couple of small ones here which I think you'll enjoy. The first one is called The Gorse. Ne'er have I seen so prodigal a sight, it fills the rustic wanderer with delight. The gorse runs riot, exquisitely fair, a warm sweet fragrance fills the April air. Its golden pinions roll before the breeze, like sunlit waves on oriental seas. 1,000 clumps are scattered o'er the plain, like crape embroidery on a counterpane. Full many a songbird weaves her mud-lined nest with this labyrinth of loveliness. Here, as I pause upon this lowland lea, I feel compelled by common courtesy, e'en as the spellbound naturalist from Sweden, to fall upon my knees and thank the God of heaven. And the second one is looking the other way now, looking up to the stars. Lo, the celestial ceiling gleams with light. 10,000 lanterns, exquisitely bright, shine down upon the unresponsive earth. From whence have these mysterious orbs their birth? Do mortal beings on those shores reside, tenants of pain, of pleasure, and of pride? Do crowded streets beside an alien sea throb with the pulse of frail humanity? Does the sun shine with health-dispensing ray, or night secure the closing of the day? Does genial spring with verdure clothe the ground, or winter cast her sable cloak around? Till time returns to her eternity, my God, I leave the mystery with thee. I think they're wonderful.
It's true, David, isn't it? Those who have the eyes to see in the countryside, the evidence is all there.
It is indeed.
And Willie Tea captured that, and he obviously had the eyes to see it.
Mm-hmm.
And deep, deep spirituality there in that, so obviously captured by Willie Tea.
Indeed, yes.
And what a marvellous talent that many people knew little about, really, in a man who just went ordinarily about his daily life amongst the people of the north of the island, and yet had such a talent to, and has left us this wonderful legacy.
I think it is a legacy. And when you think he spent most of his working life in Douglas, in a drapery shop,
Yes.
it really, it's a marvellous thing to be able to capture in words.
Yes.
What an artist would capture in paint.
Indeed. I've heard it said that a farmer's wife is a woman who can put a bale on an elevator at the bottom and have dinner ready by the time it gets to the top. But Carol, now you have a poem which is The Wives' Tale. Would you like to share that with us?
It is indeed, John, and I think there's going to be many wives out there who are going to be nodding their heads over this. It's by Seamus Heaney. Seamus Heaney grew up in Northern Ireland. He was born in 1930, and he was obviously a great observer of what went on in the countryside. When I had spread it all on linen cloth under the hedge, I called them over. The hum and gulp of the thresher ran down, and the big belt slewed to a standstill, straw hanging undelivered in the jaws. There was such quiet that I heard their boots crunching the stubble 20 yards away. He lay down and said, "Give these fellows theirs, I'm in no hurry," plucking grass in handfuls and tossing it in the air. "That looks well." He nodded at my white cloth on the grass. "I declare a woman could lay out a field, though boys like us have little call for cloths." He winked, then watched me as I poured a cup and buttered the thick slices that he likes. "It's threshing better than I thought, and mind, it's good clean seed. Away over there and look." Always this inspection has to be made, even when I don't know what to look for. But I ran my hand in the half-filled bags hooked to the slots. It was hard as shot, innumerable and cool. The bags gaped where the chutes ran back to the stilled drum, and forks were stuck at angles in the ground, as javelins might mark lost battlefields. I moved between them back across the stubble. They lay in the ring of their own crusts and dregs, smoking and saying nothing. "There's good yield, isn't there?" As proud as if he were the land itself. "Enough for crushing and for sowing both." And that was it. I'd come and he had shown me, so I belonged no further to the work. I gathered cups and folded up the cloth and went. But they still kept their ease, spread out, unbuttoned, grateful, under the trees.
How accurate that's reflected, Carol.
I think there'll be a few farmers out there thinking, right, okay.
I always thought when our wives did sample the grain that they knew exactly what we
Well,
meant.
they do. Of course they do. They know absolutely.
Carol, thank you very, very much for that.
You're listening to 50 Years Serving the Island, a series showcasing highlights from the Manx Radio archives from the station's first 5 decades as the Isle of Man's public service broadcaster. Today, a special Easter edition of the farming programme from 2003, which sees John Kennaugh reflecting on the spirituality of the countryside.
This is one now. It's Easter Day, and we're thinking about things spiritual. And, of course, the social centre in many a hamlet, many a village, many a country district is the church or the chapel. And here's another one from Tony Hodgson's book that he found in a writing called The Old Oak by J.E. Linnell. As church warden, he was quite an autocrat. For a parson he could respect, he would do anything in his power. As an old-fashioned churchman, towards such as were responsible for high church innovations, he showed open resentment. One of the most pernicious among the innovators worried him for some time to have the pulpit moved to another site, where the preacher might be better seen by the congregation. "We must do something to get the people to church," he said. "Get the people to church," retorted the warden. "Get the people to church." Time was when they needed no getting. When we had the old fox-hunting parsons here, and the band played, and we sang old-fashioned tunes, the fold came of their own accord, and the church was filled. We built a gallery to hold 120 more, and that was filled too. The pulpit stood in the middle of the church then, and it did very well. And then a lot of your sort came with new-fangled notions and changed everything. First, the pulpit had to be moved towards the chancel. It didn't stand in its right place there, and it had to be shifted again. You've taken half the gallery away, and even then you can't half fill the church. Soon there'll be no congregation at all, and all you can suggest is to move the pulpit again. The pulpit will not be moved. It isn't the pulpit, man. The pulpit's all right. It's the damn fools like you who get into it that empty the church. And I have to remind listeners, for those who don't know, that I am a Methodist local preacher, and I take my share of the criticism that quotation implies, and I'll take care in future to avoid such criticism. But I thought I would share that with you, told very largely against myself. David, have you got any more of Willie Tea? I know he has a whole book published, and you have that book in front of you. Perhaps you've found one or two more you can share with us.
Yes, I think there's one here called Ploughing, which again summarises what we're trying to get across today. And I'll read it for you. I love to roam the countryside in the early days of spring, when the horses strain on the brethricks, and the brethricks strain on the quing, and the lately tarnished ploughshare is burnished a silvery white, and the coulter cuts through the fertile clod from dawn till the waning light. The ploughman holds the guiding reins as he travels up and down, and piece by piece the verdant sward is turning a golden brown. The horses move at a steady pace, their heads erected high, and the seagulls circle, sweep and dive with a weird and piercing cry. 'Tis dusk, and the sun has dropped below the horizon's rosy verge, and one by one from the vaults of heaven the silent stars emerge. The ploughman unhooks his faithful team and leads them home to rest, as the last faint glimmer of evening light fades away in the west. 'Tis late. The moon in the cloudless sky doth her ageless vigil keep. The horses are safe in the stable, and the ploughman is fast asleep. He dreameth not of his weary toil, or his wanderings o'er the lea, but of golden sheaves of the harvest home, and the millier yet to be. Looking forward to the future as well as today.
That paints a super picture, David, particularly that passage where you start, "'Tis dusk," and the whole mood changes and becomes more reflective on a busy day. And Willie Tea has captured that so very, very well. I love that one, David. Thank you very much for bringing that to us.
It's a pleasure.
Carol, have you got one more? I know you've got a William Wordsworth one for us.
Yes, I have.
Would you like to share that
Yes.
one with us?
There's one I found here called The Shepherd and His Dog. And he wrote this in 1805, so it's nearly 200 years old, you know, just amazing. I remember, far from home once having strayed, while yet a very child, I saw a sight, and with what joy and love! It was a day of exhalation spread upon the mountains, mists and steam-like fogs rebounding everywhere. Not vehement, but calm and mild, gentle and beautiful, with gleams of sunshine on the islet spots and loopholes of the hills. Wherever seen, hidden by quiet process, and as soon unfolded to be huddled up again. Along a narrow valley and profound I journeyed, when aloft above my head, emerging from the silvery vapours, lo, a shepherd and his dog in open day. Girt round with mists they stood, and looked about from that enclosure small, inhabitants of an aerial island, floating on, as seemed, with that abode in which they were, a little pendant area of grey rocks, by the soft wind breathed forward.
Thank you, Carol, for that. David, have you got one more from Willie Tea's book?
I have, called The Wandering Muse. He referred to himself as a muse. And this is subtitled Manxland, April to June. Fresh tinselled frosts of April's morn, with braided pride the hills empty. The silent sentinel retires from her lone vigil o'er the world. Gay linnets chant the flowery spray, ascending warblers meet the skies, above the arches of the grove the crimson sun doth cheerful rise. Soft, kindly solar rays descend, and in their downward venture bring the varied lineaments of life, the vernal traceries of spring, fresh, frisking lambs which love to catch the sun's irradiating beam, skip lightly on the daisied bank that slopes towards the silver stream. With a light air of sweet content, the kine reposing in the shade, in leisured laziness, in breath the fragrance of the scented glade, where lilies bloom and lilacs smile, and the wild plums burst from bud to flower, cross late awakening wandering bees once more their native haunts explore. The artless swallow then appears, and wheels her flight on lightning wing. Unbridled beauties leap to life, awakened by the breath of spring. Close by yon slowly winding stream, low shaded by the leafy fern, the wild dove murmurs in the wood, awaiting for her mate's return. Where sweet the wild rose richly blooms, in smiling beauty by the dale, or where the towering chestnut furls her fronded canvas gainst the gale, within the clustering woodbine bower that bears the marks of morning dew, the muse has delved in nature's lore, and richer lessons from her drew.
And all that can be observed by any who care to partake of whatever the Manx countryside has to offer. It's all there to be seen and to be observed as we drive round or walk the footpaths. David, thank you very much for sharing Willie Tea's poetry with us. Some time ago, I was given a book called Kelly from the Isle of Man. It's a book which contains the poetry of one Ronnie Fell, sadly no longer with us, but many will remember Ronnie as he lived in Union Mills. He too was a great poet. I know Carol has read this poem for us on Easter Day on previous occasions, but it is so appropriate, it is such a moving piece of poetry that I've asked Carol to read it again. Carol?
Yes, this is called The Witness, and it's definitely a poem with a message. As I looked at the man on the cross, on the hill, I turned to my neighbour and said, "Was he a murderer or a thief, that the Romans wanted him dead?" But my friend replied that neither was true. It was just a political ruse, for the man just crucified had claimed that he was the King of the Jews. As I looked at the man on the cross on the hill, with his spurious crown of thorn, I wondered what manner of man this was that had merited such scorn. He had power to heal the sick and the lame, and to raise the dead from the grave. He said he had come to save the world, but himself he could not save. As I looked at the man on the cross on the hill, and the blood that had trickled down from the nails that were holding his hands and feet, on his face from beneath that crown, the man at my elbow turned and said, "Once I heard him preach that love would overcome the world, and God was within everyone's reach." As I looked at the man on the cross on the hill, came a voice from the darkening sky. "This was my only son," it said, "and you have watched him die. Would you care to see any son of yours suffer such awful pain? Then pray that your sons will pray to him, that he shan't have died in vain."
Carol, thank you very much for sharing that with us. A marvellous, marvellous piece of poetry from, sadly, the late Ronnie Fell.
Tremendously moving, isn't it? Very thought-provoking.
I want to finish this programme with a true story. And it involves Margaret, my wife, and myself, when we came to Bollawillian in 1965. Those who know the entrance to Bollawillian Farm Lane will know that it's a very traditional entrance with a recess from the main Peel to Douglas Road, which allows you to park once you've come out through and shut the gate. You can still go back, and as you turn in, you can come off the road. This recess is very convenient. And just after we had moved there, Margaret had bought some daffodil bulbs and had planted them round the base of the walls, just to make the place perhaps a little prettier in the springtime. And very quickly after that, the then Highway Board were repairing the road from Peel to Douglas, and having reached our entrance one Friday evening and having some tarmac to spare, very generously decided to surface the entrance to the farm lane, which they did very, very well, with good tarmac, and rolled it down very firmly. Well, we were very grateful, and we thanked them profusely for thinking on us and being so considerate. But it was goodbye to the daffodils, which were now firmly underneath several inches of tarmac. Until the spring. Come the spring, round the bottom of the walls we first noticed just small bulges appearing in the tarmac. And then these bumps started to crack open. And up through the cracks on one fine morning came the first green shoots of the daffodils. If you take a daffodil leaf, you can crush it very easily between your thumb and finger. But if you try to push that same finger through the tarmac, you will find it is impossible. There was displayed for us a power that we didn't understand, and there for today lies a lesson. Just because we don't understand a power that's at work, we don't dismiss it.
A special Easter edition of the farming programme from 2003 with John Kennaugh and guests Carol Little and David Jackson, reflecting on the spirituality of the countryside. And you can listen back to that programme along with additional content from the Manx Radio archives online at manxradio.com/portal.